Okay, we are at the starting time. I'd like to try to start close to being on time so we can get out early. It's been a long day. As someone who teaches people who want to go into government service, this has been a very fulfilling day for me because it is always good to see good things being done in government instead of reading the horror stories on page 3 of the SAC-B. A couple of things about my talk. From data to wisdom. When William Eggers talked over lunch, we talked about what are some of the barriers of using new technologies, new ideas in the public sector. And the three that came out were culture, know-how, and budget. I'm not going to be talking about budgets, but basically I am going to be talking about culture and know-how. I'm going to be talking about what's a mindset that we can take to convert data into wisdom within organizations and make it really useful for furthering that organizational mission. As a teacher, mainly, and not someone who were a public sector manager, I welcome questions. And that means I welcome questions anytime. So if you have a question on slide 3, raise your hand, I'll stop, and we can go over it. I've taught a lot of statistics, I've taught a lot of economics. I'm very used to people not having any idea what I'm saying. And I'm holding this upside down. You guys and me tangentially are really facing a tsunami of data coming down upon you. We are seeing such things as Fiscal is coming down the road, which is going to change your access to budget information. Twitter feeds you're being able to read. Everything that's being migrated into the web is becoming digitized data almost automatically, and so that's data that can be analyzed. There's remote sensing devices like the remote sensors that William Eggers talked about. Caltrans has embedded millions of sensors into our roads so we know how traffic is flowing at all time. We have new mobile apps that allow you to interact with customers on a real-time basis, and they're able to give you feedback on such things. Where a great example are mobile apps that allow people to rate parks and complain about broken park equipment. We're digitizing all sorts of data that used to be paper-based, and now it's available for analysis. People are using Facebook, gives you lots of data for analysis. And then there's email. We can't forget about that. All of your email correspondence with your customers is data that can be analyzed. So what are we going to be doing with all of this data going forward? What's going to happen to public managers? Are they going to wipe out on this tidal wave, or are they going to be epic? And so the point that I'll be making over the next half hour is that it really depends on being able to take that data and to convert it into wisdom. I'm going to give you a broad strokes perspective on how this is done, but it'll really show you the pieces of the types of skills that you want to have, but more importantly, that you're going to want to have within your organization to be able to do this. So this road to wisdom is we're going to be able to start with data, transform that into information, transform that information to knowledge, and then using that knowledge judiciously produce wisdom. And so I'm going to explain each one of those steps. So what about starting with data? So raw data is not very usable, but you're producing enormous amounts of it all the time. Here is just a made-up example, and this would be something, say your department produces applications from customers, and that you've been wanting to figure out how well you're doing. So every single quarter, you've been sending out 1,000 surveys, and you get 1,000 survey responses from your customers, and you have information on that on the mode of delivery. You can do some of your transactions on the internet, some are by mail, some are in offices. If they're in offices, it tells you which office it's in, how long it took it, what type of transaction, and then you survey people. How satisfied were you overall? How satisfied were you with the time that it took you? Did you get the right information? And you produce a data set. Not every organization, but the state is moving in this direction that surveying people in this way is going to be a normal course of business for public sector enterprises. So the whole point about data, though, is it's not very useful at all. Looking at this row of numbers, it's incomprehensible and it's really overwhelming. What do you do with it? So the first thing that you have to do is you have to turn it into some type of information. And what information is just that data organized in some way so that you can make sense out of it. And by the way, so some people are being so kind to actually write things down. I forgot to hand these out, but if you pass these out, it has all the major points in those points. It's a classic professor move to forget to hand out the thing. So information is data that's organized so that you can make sense of it, and then when you make sense of it, it tells you what's going on with your organization. Then you can move from that into knowledge, and knowledge is where you pair information about what's going on with some theory, some level of explanation of why you think what's going on is going on, and then you have some knowledge of how the results arise, how the things that you're doing well come about, and how what's causing you to do poorly as an organization. And then for the wisdom, it's that you link that knowledge that you've gained through your analysis to your organizational mission in such a way that you understand how the use and understanding of that data furthers your organizational mission. So how do we get down this road of how did that happen? Oh, okay. How do we get down there? And so there's basically 3 easy steps. I've distilled them to a single word, but they can be really skills that take a long time to build, but it's important to understand what are the skills. So to turn data into information, it's basically the skill of inquiry, asking the right questions, knowing how to come up with answers. To turn information into knowledge, you have to be able to explain. You have to come up with a story and then see if your story holds water for explaining what you observe in your data is coming about. And then those are very technical steps. And for people who have taken statistics, they're actually what I teach people in statistics classes. Please don't get scared. The last step of turning this knowledge into wisdom is really requires the skill of leadership. It's a management skill, and it is one of the most difficult ideas of getting data to be used judiciously and well in your organization. So to be able to navigate this entire road requires a very complex set of both technical and managerial skills. Now, let me talk a little bit about this first step, about inquiry. Yes, curiosity did kill the cat, but it should not kill a bureaucrat. And in this, even though I have spoken to many people who have held in state government, who have held data close to their chest, not wanting to share it, not wanting to inquire it, in this new age, curiosity about data is going to be a preeminent skill in this. All data has a story to tell. And just like a reporter goes out and interviews people to get the story, a good analyst will look at a data set and figure out what's the story inside of that data set. And news editors will say that they have a new cub reporter and they'll say, that guy really has a nose for news. They know how to get that story from going out to interviews. Well, I can tell you that there's exactly the same thing with a data set. I've had students who just have that nose for storytelling with data, and it's a skill. I can teach it a little bit, but I'm telling you it's something innate. The hint here is if you have it, advertise it to other people in your organization because you have a really valuable skill. If you have someone in your organization that really has that skill, keep them close to you and nurture them because they're going to be increasingly valuable in this data-infused age. This is a theme that I'm going to be talking about, that not everyone has to know all of these skills that I'm going to be talking about today, but all organizations need to be able to create a team, and the team doesn't have to be large. We're talking 2 or 3 people that in conjunction can have all of these skills. So what are you trying to look for in your data set? You can look for trends, what's happening over time. You can look for outliers and anomalies. What's different? What's really good or what's really bad? And what you're thinking of is that if you find something that where something is much worse than in other places, you're finding a performance gap. That's something that you need to pay attention to. If you're finding an outlier that's much better than other places, you're looking at an exemplar, and you need to start thinking about how can I copy that? What can I do to replicate that? So how do we do this? What's the simple type of analysis? And the most important thing is something very simple. In Excel, there's a bunch of functions to graph data that are right there in the middle of an Excel sheet, and they're the most important things. You don't need statistics, you don't need predictive analytics and all this sophisticated stuff. You need to be able to draw a graph. If you don't know how to do it, you need someone in your organization who can do it for you, and you need to hold them close and hold them dear, because they're going to be extremely valuable for you in your organization. So let me take a look at this. This is a first cut of this, and this is actually some graphing of information that I'm taking from one of the departments here in California. So you could say, well, what's going on in this organization? And we can say, well, let's look at the performance in the fourth quarter of 2014. You looked at the survey responses, what was your overall satisfaction with your last transaction? And you figure out what was the percentage of the people who said good or excellent. So this is what's your positive rating on this. And so in this case, I tallied this up, and about 73% of the people said that they rated their last transaction, their satisfaction with the last transaction as good or excellent. And our target was 70%. And so you put it right there, you put a nice big green light there to show that you've achieved your department, your goal, and then you also can explain exactly what this goal is about. This is a very common form of scorecard. This is a good solid use of data. So what do? Well, I achieved my goal. I pat myself on the back, go home happy, and have a beer that night. No, that's not the answer that I was looking for. We can go back to our data set. To get this, this bar chart, I looked at 1,000 surveys, and I summarized one question on 1,000 surveys. So I used 1,000 pieces of information. But if I look at this database, I have 13 quarters, I have 1,000 surveys each quarter, I have about 12 questions. I have about 140,000 pieces of information just in this little data set. That's kind of common. Data sets with hundreds of thousands and millions of pieces of information are becoming more and more common. So this graph right here uses less than 1% of the available information that we have in this. You need to dig deeper. You need to look further. How do you do that? All you have to do is remember one word: compare, compare, compare. Comparison is the root for doing turning data into information. You can compare over time, look at time trends. You can look over different geographic units. So if your department has offices in different cities, DMV has as many offices throughout the state, you can compare them. You can compare delivery methods. If some of your customers use the internet versus some using the mail, compare them. Service populations, are the elderly or some minority groups equally satisfied with the service that you're providing them during others? Make those comparisons. There's administrative units, maybe 2 units that aren't doing exactly the same thing, but something close, so that you can still make comparisons between them. What I have in mind is, if you look at the Department of Consumer Affairs, that there are different bureaus for different industries. They're doing something, fielding and investigating complaints, but not exactly the same thing. But still, you can make valuable comparisons between them. You can look to similar governments. What are other states doing? In particular, what's Texas doing, or what's New York State or Connecticut doing? And then you can look at benchmarks. There are organizations out there that go around to governments and collect benchmark data. I'm working with Los Angeles right now, their Department of Water and Power. For decades now, there have been national associations of municipal utilities and municipal water departments that have been publishing loads of benchmarks. What's their average cost for sending out a bill? What's their average leakage rate? On and on and on. When did LA start using all of these comparisons to improve their performance? Like 3 months ago. It is really something that is very powerful to do. So what do? Let's go and try to make a comparison. I go back to Excel, and I'm going to, again, just ask it to produce a line chart for me, which is this function up here, and I'm just going to organize it by year, or by quarter and by year. And that produces this thing. Now I have a lot more information, and I have a story that's a lot richer than the story that I told originally with that single bar chart. Now I have that, yes, our satisfaction levels have always been above 70%. So we've always been meeting our target, but we're doing worse. So now I have some real information about what's going on in my organization. We're not doing badly, but there's something driving things so that our performance is degrading over time. Now, as you notice this, I hope that you notice this, when you have a piece of information, it instantly begs the question, well, why? And that's where explanation comes in. So from going from that information to some real knowledge, we have to answer that why question. What's going on here? How can we explain this? Is this complicated? Well, we spend many years with PhD students training them how to build theories and test them and all that stuff. But actually, it doesn't produce all that much of great value. But for public managers, all you need to get used to is just tell a story. You're always telling stories within your organizations that try to explain how things are going. Well, just think clearly about what those stories are. Fortunately, William Eggers actually told this story earlier today, is that maybe what's going on with customer service is that with the rise of the internet, or maybe it was Secretary Batcher who told the story. With the rise of the internet, we're changing our expectations, is that we're expecting 24-hour call centers, instant returns, chat lines that respond to us in a couple of minutes. Maybe all of those combined are changing our expectations that when we go use government services that are not changing so rapidly, we get discouraged. So what would we expect if that's in fact the story? Well, one thing that we would possibly expect is maybe internet, if we looked at internet service delivery versus in-office, that the in-office people would degrade, they would look worse, but the internet wouldn't be so bad because it would be more similar to what people expect in the private sector. So what do? Again, I asked for a line chart, and now I'm just going to organize it by quarter and by the delivery mode. And so in my delivery mode, it says either that I have mail or office or the internet. And so now I'm going to get a line chart, and my line chart is going to have multiple lines on it. This green line in the middle is for mail, and you see it bounces up and down, but kind of ends up in the same place. And then I've drawn a trend line on that, which Excel will just do for you automatically, no statistics involved. Or this black one is for the internet, and again, the satisfaction bounces up and down, but kind of ends up in the same place. But here, now only just by drawing this out, we're drawing some explanation that here, look at what's going on with the office, that is trending downwards. So only by drawing this graph, we have a strong, some good evidence that we do have a story here, that something is going wrong and people going to the office are becoming increasingly dissatisfied. So what do? Do we just say that, aha, maybe do we move everyone to the internet? Well, that's not feasible in state government because we got to provide services to everyone. And so we always have this obligation to provide new forms of service delivery, but maintain the old ones. But let's dig a little bit deeper. And now we can ask the charts for comparison. We have several offices here in there, and we can, so I'm just asking another question. Maybe something is going on between my offices. Some are working better than others, and so there may be some information and knowledge in that. So I draw another graph. And here I get a little bit more complicated. 3 of these offices, the red one, the blue one, and the green one, they kind of just bounce around, but one really kind of shines out here, that the black one, the black office, which is Manager D, which is managed by Manager D, has a really high satisfaction level, but look what's happening after that. It drops precipitously. So you go, aha, now I have some knowledge. Something may be going on with Manager D. Here's the most important slide that I have here. You gotta be skeptical. My favorite bumper sticker, don't believe everything that you think. What that translates is that you can't believe everything that the data tells you, what the data says. And this is the way to frame this. This is maybe the preeminent turn of mind that's critical in this new data age. Is you see this difference, that this chart shows us that Manager D, something's going wrong with Manager D. And so then you have to ask yourself, is Manager D's poor ratings caused because he's a bad manager, there's something wrong with his performance, or is he just having bad luck? Remember, this is just from a survey of 1,000 people. Maybe he got 1,000 grumpy people. Maybe they were surveyed on a rainy day when they just weren't in a very good mood. Maybe he just happened to get people who were the inveterately dissatisfied, who are the people who took the survey in his region. And so there's always these 2 options with data. Is there something underneath causing that? So is there poor management, or is there just bad luck in the way the data came out? And this is what's called a hypothesis test in statistics. And if you can't read what it says in small letters, yes, a little statistics does come in handy. Who here would know how to do this hypothesis test? Okay. Who here thinks that there is someone in their organization that would know how to do this hypothesis test? See, you're all safe. Everyone who raised their hand, you don't have to know how to do it. What you have to know is that there's a question to be answered. You don't have to know the technical mumbo-jumbo to actually answer that question. Every department in an office in California doesn't necessarily have, but should have someone who can answer that question very quickly for you. It would only take them about 5 minutes to do so. So the reason you need to answer this question is that otherwise you end up chasing shadows. Is that if you're going to make a managerial decision every single time the data changes, you may be just changing course for things that are just happening because of noise, because of random chance. I have seen this actually work in certain organizations where the LAPD they'll see pedestrian accidents go from 2 to 3 in a certain area, and they'll go, oh my God, what's going on there? Please give me your explanation. And my explanation is that probably was just random, that one more person got hit this month compared to last month, and we don't really need to spend so much time thinking about that. So now we have figured out, let's assume that after you do that statistical test, the person comes back to you and goes, actually, Manager D didn't really do all that different. It just seems like it was just random chance. That's the best explanation. So we don't seem to have an explanation that managers are making a big differences between my offices. So what's another possible story that could explain why performance in the offices is doing so poorly? Well, what has happened since the financial crisis to all of your departments in California? You've been eviscerated. You have lost employee after employee. So maybe what's been going on is the staff has been cut significantly, and so that they have not been able to provide top-notch service to their customers in these offices. So we have data on staffing and customer load in this data set. And then the most important skill in all of that is just division. Division is an incredibly important data analytic tool, because we can just look at how many customers does each staff person serve, and you have an efficiency measure. And these types of efficiency measures are enormously useful for understanding organizational performance. Well, I could just chart that over time, and in the status set, you see that actually the number of people that each staffer has to serve has been increasing over time, what you would expect after a financial crisis where we have budget constraints. And then you can ask the next question, goes, well, does poor staffing lead to poor customer reviews? And so then that's asking a relationship. Is there a relationship between staffing levels and customer reviews, customer ratings? And to do that, I go back to Excel and I just ask it for a scatter plot. And so this is going to show me the relationship between two pieces of data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the transactions per staff and then to satisfaction levels. And I get this scatter plot right there. And now I have this piece of information that shows that as the customers served by each employee increases, satisfaction is clearly going down. Now what I've done is I've created some knowledge. I have a cause and effect relationship, and I could, as a manager, I know what I need to do. I'm not necessarily going to get that staff back, but I have the evidence now to demonstrate why our performance has been problematic and one clear way to fix that performance. Now, the next step is the most difficult one. It's the toughest peak to climb in the ladder of knowledge. And that is to take this knowledge and really to create it wisdom, to link it to organizational goals and imbue the entire organization with just this data orientation. Now, the most important thing to understand is that this knowledge, even though it's incredibly useful, is ambiguous. And just as I showed, it looked like Manager D was performing poorly, but when we dug deeper, it turned out that it was staffing levels and not his personal managerial style that was the problem. So this knowledge is not going to chart a direct and unambiguous path through a maze, tell you exactly what you need to do as a manager. In contrast, you have to treat this type of knowledge that you can get from data like a medieval map. It's very useful and can be very helpful for getting you to where you want to go, but the map is full of errors and it's full of monsters to attack you if you make any missteps. Feels like working in bureaucracy. So one of the most important things that you need to do to really be able to use data wisely instead of and get the most out of it for your organization is you can't be too rigid. You have to understand that there is this ambiguity to this. Being very rigid, taking data, creating metrics, and then enforcing strict accountability standards by those metrics is going to lead to a whole set of organizational pathologies. And we've seen this time and time again. You end up with things like teaching to the test. You end up with things with high levels of employee dissatisfaction. Or you end up with instances where people start gaming the system and they start changing the data slightly to make themselves look better. We've seen all of those prominent examples of all of those in both policing and in No Child Left Behind. So to really get beyond that, it requires this high level of leadership. And so you've gained this knowledge by turning the data into information, telling stories and checking out those stories. You know some things about what's going on in your organization, but you still can apply that knowledge judiciously. The example that I have here is where at first you had some data that said Manager D was a poor performer. Well, you could have taken him out and made him accountable for his poor performance as a manager. But then you would have been doing it for the wrong reasons, and the better management technique is to contextualize all that information, dig deeper, and understand what's going on. The leaderships, you need to create a culture of curiosity. The worst thing that the leadership in an organization can do is have a lot of information being collected but never use it. And if people in your organization see information not being used, and they're spending a lot of effort collating it and making it available to people, they're going to feel like their time is wasted. So when the leadership asks questions, wants to see graphics to get some information out of that data, that's showing to the entire organization the importance of this process. One of great examples, when you succeed at this, you can imbue an entire organization with a data-based organizational purpose. The greatest example of this was Michael Bloomberg when he was mayor of New York City. He used to say, but it was a common refrain among his top managers throughout city government: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So that people were always looking for more information because the culture demanded information and knowledge because they knew that that was going to support their management. And finally, when you create these metrics, there's a lot of talk about accountability. And accountability is important for holding employees accountable, holding managers accountable. But you also very much have to think about capacity. What good use of data is doing is going to enable people to do their job better. And that's where you can connect the use of the data, the analysis of that data to the organizational goals and to the individual goals within that organization, and then you've made the full link. This is my recap. I don't have to go over this in details, but these are basically some basic habits that enable you to start marching down the road, taking data, which you are going to be confronted with no matter what happened, and turning it in to wisdom. If you want to know more, I can give you a couple of things. I blog every once in a while about performance management. That's it. Or you can just Google Weare performance management blogspot. That gets you pretty much to the same place. What I have just been talking about is actually kinds of summarize the analytic components of getting a Master's of Public Administration or a Master's of Public Policy. So I encourage people who are really interested in this of either considering coming or sending people within your organizations to get an MPP and an MPA. And I won't, and I won't be too organizational centric. Send them to Sac State, send them to UCF if you want to, but we are ranked 6th in the country. And we've set up the program so that that all of our students are working full time and they take courses in the evening. So I must say that I'm entirely disappointed that no one asked a single question while I was talking. But now you must ask a question, because either that or I will quiz you. Yes.
So in your presentation, you do the conclusion that it was due not to the manager, but it was due to overworked employees. But manager is also responsible for motivation of employees, selection of employees, and the performance of the employees. So can you, I know you said use it judicially, but can you randomly conclude that, or can you conclude that the manager had no impact on that decrease?
Okay. Let's. All I can. This is the way that you need to interpret this data. Manager D, so that black manager who seemed like things were going wrong. What I said is the existing evidence did not indicate that there was something about that particular manager that would make it unusual to have that decrease in performance. So we didn't have any evidence to say that they were bad. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they're doing a good job. So the judicious supervisor will say, maybe I need to continue looking at this person, looking into this office and digging deeper into what's going. But you don't have an evidence. The evidence that I presented you here didn't give you a strong case to come down on that manager.
Because I saw that manager D had peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm.
One was consistently training
Right.
that I saw to be more problematic, but more
As I said, don't believe everything that you think. The reason to have someone in statistics is to have someone who knows a set of techniques to test really whether there is a trend. There is a trend even when you can see something. When you present people with graphs like this, it is a very natural human reaction to look to find trends within a graph. And then, and in fact, social psychologists do these experiments where they just give people random graphs. The line is just going up and down randomly, and they ask, is there a pattern? And most people will find a pattern even though the line is just completely random. And so what statistics allows you to do is to test that rigorously. And the important thing to know that is that just a couple of quarters of poor performance does not necessarily add up to poor performance. But you would want to continue checking. Other questions? Yes.
How would you do this type of analysis in text? Let's say your data is thousands or millions of pages of text.
Okay. Text is more difficult to analyze than the numbers that are set up in nice tables. There are lots of easily available programs now that you can give someone a text, and they will count up the number and prevalence of words, and then they will produce displays of that. In fact, SAS downstairs is one of the providers of that type of software. And so when you ask this question, what are the most important words? There are ways to analyze the frequency of words and the association of words with other words.
That would be keyword analysis.
There is keyword analysis.
That concept analysis.
These are all possible ways to do it. There's a lot of natural programming language, but these are just more sophisticated ways of doing this. So the important thing to understand is that sort of data, looking at tweets, looking at posts on Facebook and other things, you can do lots of work on that, and to see what concepts are trending over time. That's not actually an analysis that I have ever done, but then the important thing is to be curious about about asking that question, and then there are easily people who can do that analysis. Yes.
I'm curious whether you think that which of these two is the larger problem? The lack of competencies within public sector organizations having to do with research and statistics, or a lack of either willingness or ability on the part of the leadership in the organization to make decisions based on data rather than, let's just say, other factors?
They are both enormous challenges. The first one, though, as I will say, is some of the exemplars of data-driven decision-making. So Baltimore, the state of Maryland, New York City, their teams of analysts are relatively small, so that we're talking 5, 6, maybe a dozen people at most who do this for large governmental units. So at this point, I would say from my interactions, my talking with people in GovOps, California state government is under provision with this sort of talent right now. But the thing is, to get to that number of talent, we're only talking about hiring a few dozen people. So it's been a source of frustration. I'm going, well, why don't you just hire those few dozen people and then have them working around? Governor Brown's office of GoBiz has been doing these pilot projects with Six Sigma techniques, which is one form of data analysis. So they did a series of about 15. They're starting up another series of about 25. So this is really beginning to create those pockets of expertise, which will help grow. The question about political resistance is the story is, politics does reign supreme. So if you are a very high level people, you're thinking about politics and not necessarily about the operations of your organizations, and they can be quite divergent. That's not something that I will be able to fix, but there is a new generation of people who are coming in who are increasingly being able to see that really to be able to drive their organizational performance, they do need to have that data mindset. And so I think that when we talk about millennials and where we need to go with California leadership, I think that is one of the things that California will have increasingly in its upper management ranks. Yes?
So you said don't believe everything the data says. And so I find for most of our organizations and decisions are data driven. Is there, when do we know not to, how does that work?
Okay, so when do you know whether to use data? And that is in fact what I was talking about when I said a hypothesis. Oh no, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it back at all. So when I talked about the hypothesis test, it's a relatively technical thing. So one thing that you can see is that I was saying, well, all these lines are very jagged. Are we sure that manager D, this black line, is having a worse performance than all the others? And so you can test that, and I'm just supposing that the answer is no, that the data isn't doing that. But in another situation, we could ask, does the data support the idea that customer satisfaction is lower in those situations where each staffer has to service more customers? And in this case, the data is strong. And so if you did a hypothesis test here and asking the question, do we think that there's a real relationship between staffing levels and satisfaction levels? The answer to that hypothesis said it would be yes, there does seem to be a relationship. And that's where you can, so doing those hypothesis tests is important. And that's why it is useful to have someone available on your staff who can answer that question. Is there a relationship or is there not? And you want to follow, when you find the relationship, that's when you want to use that in your decision-making process. Yes?
I just want to make a statement in confirmation of your lecture here. To me, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're doing is you're saying that these are points of departure. The data, it's very easy for us to rely upon a process of data and any number of unique methods of analysis, but there's no substitute for the wisdom of experience in the particular application. And I think that you can talk about the peaks and the valleys, all of those are indicators that can be used. But in the end, we want to work positively with our intentions instead of negatively to find a scapegoat. And I think that very easily can occur when sometimes we have to have an answer by dawn 30 tomorrow morning as to why something's going sideways. So I think the intent of your lecture, if I may confirm or you can debate or deny, that is the fact that utilize these with an open mind. Utilize this talent, these processes or techniques as a tool, but not the ultimate answer.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation.
Yeah, no, I think it is very important to understand that data provides you a really useful map, but it is that medieval map that's full of errors, full of risks inside that map. And so that's where the leadership and the judicious use of data becomes so key to making it an effective organizational tool instead of something that can lead to some organizational pathologies.
And you said that at the outset because you moved at that point.
Okay, I have been told that I am all done here, so thank you very much.